My name is Marla. I'm 23 years old and I work as a childcare worker. I married my husband Kenneth right after I graduated from college, earlier than others around me. Kenneth is 24 years old, 1 year older than me. I had a crush on Kenneth, whom I met in my social circle, and then I made a passionate pursuit. Kenneth also responded to my advances, and during our university days, we went on various dates and had a lot of fun together. We had promised to get married after graduating from university, so I had already introduced myself to my future in-laws during our student days. However, since the early stages of our relationship, I often visited my future in-laws' house, so reporting our intention to marry was more of a formality. Still, my in-laws were very pleased and accepted me as part of the family. After graduating from college, I got married without any issues. However, what followed became a source of trouble. Kenneth graduated a year earlier and was working diligently as a working professional. I joined a major company, so my salary was decent, but considering expenses, it was quite moderate. I didn't plan to quit my job as I wanted to experience my dream job as a childcare worker. Despite the various challenges in the childcare profession, I enjoyed being healed by the children. I intended to continue working as a childcare worker until I had children with Kenneth. However, balancing work and household chores turned out to be more challenging than I imagined. Waking up early to do laundry, preparing breakfast and lunch for both of us, and returning home to vacuum, clean, and bathe were all demanding tasks. Kenneth, who had lived alone during college, cooperated with most household chores, but he couldn't cook. Therefore, cooking became my responsibility. Balancing household chores in my first year of work proved challenging for my clumsy self. Kenneth, a generally easygoing person who doesn't complain much, had only one recurring complaint for me.
Again? Seasoned carrots? Didn't we have that the other day?
Watching the dinner I made, Kenneth sighed as usual. His reaction to my cooking bothered me. Kenneth's mother is an incredibly skilled cook who even runs a cooking class. Her repertoire of recipes is incredibly vast. Kenneth never had the same dish for a month while living under his mother's culinary expertise. Kenneth, who grew up in such a home, has a discerning palate, and I was told that when he lived alone he mostly ate out or had boxed lunches because the food he cooked himself was not good enough. It's understandable that he can't cook, but having to endure complaints every day like this was tough. Sorry, but wasn't it quite some time ago I made seasoned carrots?
I think it was about 2 weeks ago, but your repertoire of dishes doesn't seem extensive, right? Besides, my packed lunches are increasingly filled with frozen foods.
Kenneth is not one to complain about housework, but he is particular about cooking, and he often finds something to criticize about my meals. In the end, he would eat it while saying, "Well, I chose it," but it never seemed satisfactory, and that was quite stressful. Living in an unfamiliar working life and facing daily criticism for the dishes I worked hard to prepare was tough. I also made efforts to overcome this situation, buying cooking books and trying new recipes, but none of them pleased Kenneth. I decided to wake up early and sleep early to prepare a variety of dishes for lunch, but each comment about the lunch's color being off or questions about the use of frozen items took a toll on my spirit. It is said that in the first year of a childcare worker's career, it is easy to get sick from children. I was no exception to this rule and often caught colds. On days when I felt unwell, I wished Kenneth, my partner, could prepare meals for me. However, he insisted,
even when my mom wasn't feeling well, she still cooked,
and requested that I handle meal preparation. Feverish and with a head spinning, I attached a cold compress and worked hard on preparing the meal. Kenneth, though not explicitly critical, showed it subtly. I enjoyed cooking when I lived alone. The process of making my favorite dishes with my own hands was enjoyable. However, after marrying Kenneth, cooking became nothing but a burden. Will he complain again? With this, he might criticize the color. As I cooked, I found myself thinking only about Kenneth's complaints. I might not be as good at cooking as Mom, but it's disheartening to hear that. I've told Kenneth about it too. Kenneth seemed surprised and apologized at that time, but he still had concerns about my cooking. He would eat with a reluctant expression or couldn't endure it and would complain. I began to strongly believe that I was a bad cook, and no matter how much effort I put into my cooking, all I could think was, I bet it tastes bad. Food is an important part of life. Life is brightened simply by the pleasure of eating. Every time Kenneth complained about the food, the word divorce loomed in my mind. I felt like I was darkening Kenneth's life with my poor cooking skills. One day I began to wonder if Kenneth would be better off with a wife who was a better cook. It just so happened that Kenneth and I were going back to my parents-in-law's house for a long vacation. We were good friends, except when we ate, but I was even beginning to think in my mind that this trip home might be my last. When we arrived at my parents-in-law's house, they greeted us warmly. We arrived at my parents-in-law's house a little after noon, and after chatting for a while, my mother-in-law excused herself and said, I'd better get ready for dinner. To be honest, I was depressed just standing in the kitchen these days, but I couldn't leave it to Hope alone, so I got up and said, I'll help you. My mother-in-law hesitated, but when I expressed a bit of discouragement, saying, I'd like you to teach me how to cook, she warmly accepted with a smile, saying, Then let's do it together. With her cooking class experience, my mother-in-law's culinary skills were truly impressive. She swiftly cut ingredients, smoothly handled the cooking process, and I couldn't match her expertise. As I needed the meat for making hamburgers, she smiled and struck up a conversation. Marla, do you dislike cooking? No, it's not that, but I lack confidence. Why? You're doing well. I was impressed with your skill in finely chopping onions. Getting praised for my cooking was rare. I held back tears as my heart warmed. I cook every day, but I'm not good at it. I always feel like I'm causing trouble for Kenneth. I wish I could be like you. My mother-in-law chuckled at my self-deprecating words. It's okay. The more you cook, Marla, the more you'll become skilled, just like me. You're doing great, Marla. Thank you very much. My mother-in-law's words felt like they were slowly seeping into my parched heart. My mother-in-law looked puzzled as I involuntarily choked up, but when I mentioned that onions had a stinging effect, she chuckled and said, Oh, that happens to everyone, with a smile. I couldn't possibly say to such a kind mother-in-law, I'm struggling with daily criticism about cooking from your son. And now, as the cooking concluded, dinner time arrived. Prompted by my mother-in-law, Kenneth and my father-in-law joined the dining table. When Kenneth exclaimed, Oh, upon seeing the hamburgers, I unconsciously braced myself to endure any negative comments.
Is this your hamburgers, Mom?
No, Marla made it for you.
Marla, huh?
Kenneth expressed clear disappointment, and I couldn't say anything. I had tightly gripped the fork in my hand.
Well, it's not that Marla is bad at cooking, but she makes similar things every day. The other day she made seasoned carrots, and now, 2 weeks later, she made it again. Mom, you never made the same dishes within a month. Marla might benefit from attending Mom's cooking class or absorbing it from you.
Kenneth, having had a few drinks with his father and being back home after a while, seemed relaxed. I did not know how to respond to Kenneth, who laughed and made snide remarks about me. If I didn't smile convincingly, the atmosphere would turn awkward. It was at that moment when I tried to force a cheerful conversation. Suddenly, my mother-in-law stood up and slapped Kenneth's cheek. The sound, a sharp whoosh, surprised me, but even more shocking was seeing my mother-in-law in tears. Kenneth is stunned with his hand on his smacked cheek. In the silence that followed, my mother-in-law uttered in a sorrowful voice, If you're going to grow up to be like that, I shouldn't have bothered with my cooking. Don't you understand the difficulty of working and cooking in the kitchen at the same time, Kenneth? Marla did not seem to enjoy the cooking at all. I was wondering why, but it turns out it's your fault. That's what you told Marla every day, right? If you don't understand that you should be thankful to have someone cook for you, then don't ask Marla to cook for you anymore.
Huh?
Kenneth, who raised a small voice, looks at his mother and me with a bewildered expression. My father-in-law, who was standing quietly next to me, said,
Apologize.
And his voice was indeed filled with anger.
I'm sorry.
Not understanding what was happening, Kenneth apologizes to my mother-in-law. My father-in-law sighed and took a bite of his hamburger and put down his fork.
Marla, this hamburger is really delicious. Thank you for always cooking for that foolish son of ours. It seems we didn't notice Kenneth's immaturity. He's not yet fit to be someone's husband.
Huh?
Marla, I'm truly sorry. You must have experienced many unpleasant things. It's my responsibility for not teaching Kenneth how to cook.
Caught in a deeper layer of emotions from my in-laws, I was unsettled. But Kenneth seemed even more shaken. My mother-in-law snapped at Kenneth, who was looking back and forth between his mom and dad with a puzzled look on his face.
Starting today, you'll be cooking with me. Don't run away until you understand Marla's value.
Throughout the meal, Kenneth was scolded by his parents. Cooking is something that requires attention, especially when it comes to health, and it can be a significant burden. Deciding what to cook every day can be mentally taxing. Being blamed for it can be very painful. It seemed like my parents-in-law were conveying everything I wanted to say, but couldn't to Kenneth. After that, Kenneth and I awkwardly slept in the same room. When we turned off the lights to sleep, Kenneth asked me in a small voice,
Did it hurt when I said something about your cooking, Marla?
It was tough. I even considered divorce.
Divorce?
Kenneth sat up in surprise, but I curled up in the bed. Meals are a daily thing, so being criticized by you every day was tough. I felt sad, thinking that you might not want a wife who's bad at cooking like me. When I expressed my honest feelings, Kenneth finally seemed to understand and apologized, saying,
I'm sorry.
He finally seemed to understand and apologized truly.
I'm really sorry, Marla. It's embarrassing to realize it after being told by my parents at this age. But I was wrong. Because I want to be with you forever, I'll change from now on.
Yeah, thanks. My voice, saying that, was trembling as I held back tears. The next morning, Kenneth was woken up by his mother to teach him how to cook. Although my mother-in-law is a kind person, her coaching in the makeshift kitchen was strict, and Kenneth received plenty of criticism. The first tomato soup that Kenneth finally made was surprisingly strong in taste, but I was happy that he made it for me and said, "Thank you." Kenneth ended up preparing all the meals, including lunch and dinner, during the stay at my in-laws' place, under my mother-in-law's guidance. Even though the table was filled with awkward-looking dishes, I was still happy. When getting into the car to leave, Kenneth was sternly reminded by my in-laws, "Reflect on yourself when you go home." And he replied,
I understand.
before thanking them and driving away. Kenneth, Your cooking was delicious. Thank you.
I had never cooked before, and I never thought it would be so challenging. I'm really sorry for saying all kinds of terrible things about you without knowing how hard you were trying. From now on, I'll also have some extra cooking skills.
Kenneth kept his promise and made lunch boxes the next day. In the gaps, it seemed Kenneth had added frozen side dishes. When I playfully said, "Frozen food?" he apologized, saying,
"Sorry, even frozen food should be enough,"
and sheepishly scratched his cheek. Since then, Kenneth and I have been in the kitchen together more often. I guess I was more experienced than Kenneth when it came to cooking, because while I taught him many things, he would also look at recipe books and suggest things like,
"Let's try making this next time."
And I began to enjoy cooking. I laughed when Kenneth said,
"Cooking starts when you go shopping for ingredients."
The lesson from my in-laws seemed to have a significant impact on Kenneth. Since Kenneth and I started enjoying cooking together, we haven't had any arguments, and our discussions about cooking have increased. How is Kenneth these days? My mother-in-law was very happy when I told her what was going on. And now I am pregnant. It is hard to work while dealing with my changing body. So Kenneth does most of the housework for me now. Kenneth's cooking is delicious, and we always share laughs saying, "It's delicious," during meals. I sincerely feel relieved that the cooking issue has been resolved before the arrival of our child. We were able to create a home where we could convey the joy of meals to the baby in my belly, thanks to my in-laws. This time, we are looking forward to treating our in-laws to dishes prepared by us as a couple.